Good morning, distinguished guests, esteemed speakers, ladies and gentlemen. It is our great pleasure to welcome you to the 10th anniversary celebration symposium of the CUHK Centre for Bioethics. I am Charlene Chung, a Year 1 medical student. Joining me is my co-host, Yoshi Tada, currently a 5th year medical student.
Good morning, everyone, and good morning to you, Charlene. Today's symposium is in hybrid mode. We are honored to have guests joining us in person with us at CUHK, and as well as participants from all around the world to the Zoom's webinar. Thank you all for being a part of this celebration.
This symposium is not only a celebration of the Centre's achievements, but also an opportunity to reflect on our 10-year journey and to look ahead to the future. And with that, we are honored to begin this celebration with the welcome address from Professor Phoc Tai Phai, Chairman of the Advisory Board of CUHK Centre for Bioethics. Please join us in watching his pre-recorded message.
Good morning, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. It is truly a pleasure to welcome you all today to this important gathering. I want to express my heartfelt gratitude for your presence. Today marks a significant milestone for the CUHK Centre for Bioethics. The Centre has always been about bridging the gap between cutting-edge medical advancements and the ethical considerations that shape how we apply these innovations to improve human lives. We come together today to celebrate not only our achievements, but also our shared commitment to ethical practice in medicine and healthcare. The challenges that lie ahead, from advances in AI to new frontiers in genetic medicine, will test our ability to balance technological capability with compassion and humanity. I am confident that the conversations we have today will inspire us all to think deeply about how we can use our knowledge responsibly to create a better and more ethical future for all. Today we will showcase a commemorative video. This video highlights the significant milestones and achievements of the CUHK Centre for Bioethics and captures the essence of our journey and our dedication to ethical practice in medicine and healthcare. It will serve as a meaningful reminder of our collective efforts and inspire us to continue striving for excellence in this important field. Thank you once again for joining us today. Let us embark on this journey of knowledge and ethical responsibility together.
Thank you, Professor Phoc. As highlighted in his speech, we have prepared a commemorative video showcasing the Centre's milestones and achievements over the past 10 years. Now, let's take a moment to explore together the journey of CUHK Centre for Bioethics.
I'm thrilled to commemorate the remarkable 10-year journey of the CUHK Centre for Bioethics. In envisioning the path ahead, I foresee a landscape where the realm of bioethics will encounter myriad of opportunities and challenges on a global scale. The relentless march of technology, spanning from genomics to artificial intelligence, continues to revolutionize healthcare, while a pivotal notion that will undoubtedly shape the future trajectory of bioethics is the essence of humanity.
Whether we contemplate moral issues arising from the ever-changing biomedical technologies, global pandemic, or the delicate nuances of end-of-life care, bioethics serves as a crucial reminder that the human aspect must always be prioritized in our quest for enhanced health outcomes. The Center for Bioethics has been a cornerstone of the university in nurturing these vital dialogues and fostering a culture of ethical sensibility and responsibility.
Bioethics from its very beginning was a bridge. It bridges the gap between rapid advances in biomedicine and the human experience. The great benefits of science and technology do come with potential burden or even harm to people with serious illnesses. Good medical decisions should not be just technically determined by science and technology know-how. They involve deeply human values and emotions, and ethical dilemmas require thoughtful and holistic considerations.
Beginning in 2013, from the fruitful collaboration with the CUHK Centre that helped us establish our centre, to the development of a comprehensive undergraduate medical bioethics curriculum with Columbia University, our path has been defined by both trials and triumphs. The centre has been evolving into a hub for interdisciplinary dialogue that transcends the boundaries of our initial vision.
Dr. Edgar Zhang's unwavering generosity as the primary benefactor of the Centre has been instrumental in transforming our aspiration into impactful, tangible initiatives. In particular, the Centre has served as a cornerstone in the evolution of bioethics curriculum in the Faculty of Medicine. Its impact reverberates through our medical and interprofessional education, infusing ethics contemplation into the very essence of our training for the next generation of healthcare professionals.
As I look back on the beginnings of the Center for Bioethics, supported by the Lenzen Foundation, during my tenure as Vice-Chancellor and President, I'm truly delighted to witness its outstanding growth and contributions to the field of bioethics over the past decades.
Situated in Hong Kong at the crossroads of East Asian and Western cultures, the center is uniquely positioned to bridge diverse perspectives and approaches to bioethics as we live in an increasingly globalized world that demands pluralistic viewpoints to navigate complex bioethical issues. Our commitment to advancing bioethical discourse locally and globally has been exemplified through myriad educational initiatives, research endeavors, and public engagement activities, demonstrating the significance and relevance of bioethics in our daily lives.
In addition to advancing bioethics education within the Faculty of Medicine and the university, we expanded our reach to the wider community through outreach to secondary schools, community organizations, and the public through workshops and op-ed columns, promoting bioethics at the university and beyond, making bioethics more accessible and actively integrating bioethics into everyday conversations.
Apart from our current research focuses on end-of-life care, AI and emerging technologies, genetics, genomics, and reproductive ethics, as well as culture and humanities, our collaborations with esteemed institutions such as the National Academy of Medicine and the CUHK Centre underscore our dedication to fostering a culture of ethical inquiry that transcends boundaries.
As we march towards our 10th anniversary in 2025, we remain staunch in our mission to play a pivotal role in engaging global communities in critical bioethical discussions and to foster a culture of ethical reflection and dialogue that propels positive changes in healthcare, technology, and beyond.
As we celebrate the achievements of the past decade, the Faculty of Medicine is unwavering in its continuous commitment to bolstering support for the Center for Bioethics.
Let us continue to champion the ethos of ethical excellence and human-centered care as we embark on this momentous journey into the future.
Join us in shaping the bioethical horizons in Hong Kong, Asia, and beyond.
Wow, what a wonderful video, beautifully capturing the center's dedication to advancing ethical practices in medicine and healthcare. It's a powerful reminder of how far we've come and an inspiration to continue striving for excellence in this vital field.
Now, we will have the privilege of hearing from Professor Philip Chu, the Dean of Medicine, who will share his insights on this special occasion. Professor Chu, will you please?
Dr. Edgar Jiang, Dr. Derek Au, Roger, and distinguished guests, colleagues, students, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Faculty of Medicine, the Chinese University of Hong Kong, I'd like to express my warmest welcome to all of you in joining the 10th Anniversary Celebration Symposium for the CUHK Centre of Bioethics. Today's symposium is themed Science, Medicine, and Beyond, connecting the global communities with bioethics. This reflects upon this theme. I'm reminded of the power of collaboration across borders, disciplines, and communities to advance medicine while upholding the moral, social, and cultural values that ultimately shaped patient care. Over the past 20 years, I am actually a professionally trained upper GI surgeon and privileged to witness the transformative impact of innovation and interdisciplinary collaboration. From my work in minimal invasive upper GI surgery and endoscopy to my current role as a Dean of Faculty of Medicine and also Director of the Multiscale Medical Robotics Centre, I've been applying this cutting-edge technology clinically, which revolutionized patients' outcome and the practice of medicine. In particular, my passion has been in the research of advancing these minimal invasive and robotic surgery to a higher quality and safer surgery with quicker recovery for the patients and also a more personalized care. And yet, alongside these amazing achievements in medicine come with the challenging questions. How can we ensure equitable access to new technology? How do we balance the doctor-patient relationship with the rapid growth in clinical application of these cutting-edge technology, including artificial intelligence? And how do we safeguard patients' privacy while harnessing the power of big data for better clinical decision-making? These questions exemplify why bioethics is so crucial. More than ever, we must engage in thoughtful dialogue and research to guide the ethical use of technology in medicine. And I think it's not only now and also beyond this era. For the next decade, we'll be surely seeing cutting-edge technology like genomics, genetics, changing the management of patients to a critical point where ethical issues will arise. So more than ever, we must engage this dialogue and research in guiding the ethical use of technology. And today, this timely symposium exemplifies the spirit of global engagement in addressing the moral and social dilemma that emerge from scientific breakthroughs. You'll hear from leading experts on how science, medicine, and technology can not only provide breakthrough in enhancing disease diagnosis and treatment for mankind, but to pursue these advances in the path that honor patients' autonomy, dignity, as well as enhancing the doctor's role in healing through empathy. I hope that you enjoy and engage in the fruitful exchange that would help shape the next decade of work at the CUHK Centre of Bioethics and beyond. Once again, congratulations to the Centre for Bioethics on a decade of excellence, and I wish everyone a fruitful and inspiring symposium. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Chu. Throughout its decade of service, the CUHK Centre for Bioethics has fostered vital dialogue, bridging science, healthcare, and human values. We now come to a pivotal moment in our celebration.
At the heart of this ceremony is a scale, a timeless symbol of balance and justice. This symbolizes the delicate equilibrium of core virtues that bioethicists must maintain when navigating complex ethical challenges.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the 6 key persons of the Center to take part in this meaningful ceremony. May we invite Professor Philip Chu, Dr. Edgar Chang, Dr. Derek Au, Professor Hon Lam Lee, Professor Roger Chung, and Dr. Ann Lau to come to the stage, please.
To represent this pursuit of equilibrium, we have 6 specially crafted wooden bricks, each inscribed with an important virtue guiding the work of bioethics. Now, each of the guests on stage will receive a wooden brick.
May I first invite Dr. Ann Lau to reveal the virtue inscribed on the block that she has first received.
So what I get start with R, respect.
Thank you, Dr. Lau. May I invite Professor Roger Chung to share his virtue.
Integrity. That's important, right?
Thank you, Professor Chung. May we now hear from Dr. Derek Au about the virtue inscribed on his block.
Tolerance.
Wonderful, Dr. Au. What about Professor Hon Lam Lee?
Compassion.
Thank you, Professor Lee. Now may we invite Dr. Edgar Chang to reveal the virtue on his block.
I picked this before I came in. Humility.
Thank you, Dr. Chang. And finally, Professor Xu, may we hear your virtue?
Maybe because my daughter is studying law, this is justice.
Thank you, Professor Chu. May we now invite our guests on stage to place these bricks onto the scale as a tribute to the harmonious balance required in bioethics. May we have our 6 guests take a group photo together. Thank you for being a part of this moment. Would our guests please be seated?
Just as the scale seeks equilibrium, these virtues must be balanced in our daily practice to create a healthcare environment that truly serves humanity. This harmony extends beyond hospital walls, shaping a society where ethical considerations guide our collective progress and inspire future generations.
To commemorate this special moment, shall we have a bigger group photo together with all of us in the hall?
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. The co-directors of CUHK Centre for Bioethics will now share their welcoming notes with us. Professor Chung and Dr. Lau, the stage is yours.
I'm going to use this mic if that's okay, because of my height. Good morning, Dr. Chang, Dean Chiu, all our distinguished guests, friends, and everyone. It's a great honor to speak to you all today as we celebrate the 10th anniversary of the CUHK Centre for Bioethics. I was telling all my guests that we should all treat this more as a homecoming, kind of like a family gathering, rather than a very solemn discussion about bioethics. But all the conversations today, of course, is going to be very, very important for humankind and beyond. The theme today, science, medicine, and beyond, connecting the global communities with bioethics, is one that resonates deeply with me and I'm sure everyone over here today. It challenges us to think not only about the progress that we have made in science and medicine, but also about the ethical frameworks that guide us as we navigate the uncharted waters of technological advancement. And of course, how do we engage different cultures, different traditions in the world, in an ever-changing world that we're facing now. Let me share with you a thought experiment, all right? Imagine an aged philosopher who tragically falls into an irreversible coma. But there's no advanced medical directive to guide the medical team. The doctors find themselves at a crossroads. Well, the usual one, should they continue life-sustaining treatments or should they let nature take its course? Sounds familiar, right? Now, in their uncertainty, now the less familiar part, they turn to an AI machine, right? This AI, trained by deeply analyzing the philosopher's own works, declares that the philosopher would wish to have the life-sustaining treatments. Now, should the doctors trust this AI and follow this AI-driven conclusion, with all these algorithms? The dilemma can also become even more complex when another patient, a younger one, is introduced to the equation, a young person suffering from a curable, reversible disease, however, urgently in need of the same machine. The only one that is available, of course, and that is currently being used to sustain the philosopher's physical existence. But what would the right decision be? Should we turn to the AI again? Do you think we should turn to the AI again and ask? Was the AI even trained in considering and balancing this philosopher's works against the other moral theories? Did the AI even take any crash course in bioethics to even know how to do that? And by the way, that last line was written by AI. Now, these are the types of questions that demonstrate how science and technology, despite their immense potential, also create new ethical challenges. The role of bioethics, as I see it, is to ensure that our humanity is never lost amidst these technological wonders. It is about connecting our scientific advances with the values that define us as humans: respect, justice, compassion, tolerance, humility, and integrity, just to name a few as shown on the wooden blocks as we put that on the scale just now. And well, I hope you like that ceremonial gimmick because we spent quite a lot of time thinking about it. Do you guys like it? It's kind of cool, right? And therefore, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the staff who has been relentlessly working for this, tirelessly working for this event, especially Joey, who is the contact person for most of the distinguished guests, Tim and Jovi and Grace, who was actually having her birthday last night, but there's no way that she can actually celebrate with her family. So let's please give a big hand to Grace for her dedication, and John, our postdoctoral fellow, for all the hard work that they have put in to make this happen for all of us today. Our center has played a crucial role in nurturing all these types of reflection, and as we look forward towards the future, I'm confident that we will continue to guide our global community through these complex but essential conversations. So let me now pass on to my partner in crime of the center, Dr. Ann Lau, for her welcoming message to you all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Roger. Yeah. So I must say that I'm really moved, and indeed I think Roger had the same feeling, that when we prepare along this celebration, that we feel even more humble and respect to everyone who laid a very strong and important foundation that we can further move on. So basically, we are riding on everything that our founding members and also the generous support from Dr. Zhang for everything to make this happen. So it's really wonderful to see many one of you here today as we celebrate this ceremony. And what we believe is that bioethics is not just a conversation for scientists, physicians, and philosophers. It is a conversation for everyone. When we think about the bioethical implications of medical technologies, end-of-life decisions, or resource allocation, it is crucial that we include the perspective of the people that are most affected by these decisions, patients, families, and also communities. Bioethics should be inclusive, taking into account of diverse cultural beliefs, values, and experiences, which I think it is quite well demonstrated in our gimmick, the ceremonial event here. So which can vary significantly across different societies and even within the same community. So with that, it further proves the importance of education, that we learn how to systematically review bioethical dilemmas. So in particular, since I'm focusing on education, that our education system basically train towards like how to get a very high marks, also how to like get a very good answer, right? So we find this is kind of like squeeze people that they fail to, or maybe limited to more innovative thinking, or maybe thinking their own values as well, to review their own values as well. So what we hope is that through education that people can really reflect on their own thoughts instead of just thinking about what would be the best way to answer the question. So this is not just crucially as a part of the professional training, but also to our everyday decision-making process. By listening to and learning from one another, we can develop ethical approaches that are sensitive to the needs of all communities, regardless of their socio-economic status or geographical location. The CUHK Centre for Bioethics has been committed to promoting these type of inclusive dialogues, bringing together diverse voices to discuss and address the ethical challenges that we face today. So I hope I want to invite everyone to take a look to our yellow booklet, which this is something that we are so proud of, and also a very good booklet that reflect on our whole journey. So as we look to the future, I'm confident that our continued effort in education, outreach, and community engagement will help us to create a healthcare system that not only advances scientifically, but also uphold the dignity and values of all people. Thank you once again to be part of us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Chung and Dr. Lau. To further commemorate this joyful occasion, we want to reflect on the theme of our symposium, as you've noted on the yellow booklet. We're delighted to present a special musical performance, When East Meets West, by two talented music students. Ms. Li Wenqi will perform on a Chinese musical instrument, the yangqin, and Ms. Tina Wong will perform on a Western instrument, the cello. Together, they will present Vivaldi's Mandolin Concerto in C major. Please join us in warmly welcoming Wenqi and Tina, When East Meets West.
Hopefully this is going to put everyone into the right mood, because it is not a common thing for a Chinese instrument to play an Italian piece. And this is the theme for today. Thank you very much.
What an absolutely captivating piece. Thank you, Winky and Tina, for sharing your talents with us. The harmony of an Oriental instrument and a Western classic represents the bridging of the East and West and reflects the mission of the CUHK Centre for Bioethics, which unites diverse local and global perspectives across the ethical challenges of modern healthcare. Much like this extraordinary musical collaboration, the Centre's work shows us that both balance and respect for diversity are essential to achieving harmony in both medicine and society.
Next, we would like to take a moment to express our heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed speakers who will be sharing their invaluable insights with us during this symposium. To present tokens of appreciation to our speakers, may we invite Dr. Edgar Cheng, benefactor and special advisor of CUHK's Centre for Bioethics, to come forth.
And may we have Mr. David Roscoe, Chair of the Advisory Council and Board Chair Emeritus of the Hastings Centre, to come forth. Thank you, Mr. Roscoe. We will now invite Professor Nancy Jecker, visiting professor of the CUHK Centre for Bioethics and professor of Bioethics and Humanities at the University of Washington School of Medicine.
Thank you, Professor Jecker. Now let us invite Professor Vardit Revitsky, President and CEO of the Hastings Centre, to come forth.
Would Dr. Cheng kindly remain on stage, please? We will now begin the symposium with our leadership address by Mr. David Roscoe. It is our honor to have Dr. Edgar Cheng introduce Mr. Roscoe. Dr. Cheng, please.
Good morning, everyone. I haven't spoken in public, at least for quite a number of years. So I was so nervous that I might not have this with me. So I put another envelope in the car, just in case I couldn't find this one. But it's here. Before I introduce our distinguished guest and my very good friend, Mr. David Roscoe, let me tell you a short story how our center got started 10 years ago. In December 2012, so that's more than 10 years ago, I received a letter from Dr. Millie Solomon. Millie was the president and CEO of the Hastings Centre. On behalf of the Hastings Centre, she and the then board chairman, Mr. David Roscoe, invited me to join the Hastings board. I accepted the honor, and the rest is history, what you have seen. Over the years, the Hastings Centres, along with other speakers today, and also many of you in the audience, including those virtually, together help build this center. On behalf of the center, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all. Without your support and guidance, we would not have become what it is today. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce Mr. David Roscoe. Mr. Roscoe is an influential leader in the field of bioethics and artificial intelligence. He currently chairs the Hastings Centre's Advisory Council and is board chairman emeritus. He has been deeply involved in the Hastings Center's AI research initiatives, including co-authoring the final report of their initial AI project and representing the Hastings Center in the partnership on AI. His commitment to addressing the ethical challenges posed by AI is evidenced through his work, including being a signatory to the 2022 statement by the Hastings Center for AI safety, which emphasized the importance of mitigating the risk of extinction from AI as a global priority. Mr. Roscoe also brings a wealth of experience from his 34 years career at the JP Morgan, where he retired as a managing director. I was telling a friend of mine saying that there are many managing directors these days. You walk into a bank, almost everybody is a managing director. But in those days, it's a very, very special honor and very special title. So he retired as a managing director, as well as his roles as co-CEO of Bridge Information Systems and senior advisor at Risk Metrics Group. He also served on corporate boards in Chicago and New York, and his background in economics and business adds an invaluable perspective to our discussion today. I cannot think of a better person to share his insights with us today on AI and better health, challenges to trust and governance. Please join me in welcoming Mr. David Roscoe. He almost missed the flight because of the snowstorm.
Well, that's, where's that little block that says humility? I need that. Thank you so much, Edgar. You were so kind to invite me, and the hospitality this week has been absolutely spectacular. I want to start by saying I'm here to learn, not to give. My perspectives are from a passionate layman. You probably overcharacterize my role at the Hastings Center. I was on the board, and I'll get into that in a minute. But I just want to say to Edgar, you have every right to be so proud, and I could hear it in your voice, the pride you feel for what you helped build, and look around and what you've done. It's a wonderful thing. So let me get started. As I said, this is a personal note before I get into the meat of the subject. My interest in AI started at the Hastings Center back in 2016. I'll talk in a minute about that project, but before I do, out of that project, I developed some insights, personal insights, as to what I thought was going to happen. And I forecast in 2018, and I gave a series of talks around the United States to informal people, regular people. And I said 2018, that by 2030, AI would transform society throughout the world, that the progress toward that would be unstoppable. But much would be at stake. The future of work, human values, perhaps even the destiny of the human species itself. And the other thing that was going to happen in 2013 is that my youngest grandson, Fred, who was at the time only 4 years old, would be turning 16. And so I said to myself back then, what does Fred need to know? That question has driven me then, now, and will continue to drive me forward. So what happened at that first Hastings Center project? Well, interestingly, AI and trust was a major focus of that initial project. It was a project funded by the Future of Life Institute, run by Max Tegmark, and had been funded by Elon Musk. They just started up this Future of Life Institute to focus on existential threats to the human species. Global warming, nuclear war, and Elon insisted AI, even back then. We gathered thought leaders from around the world, from tech, from academia, from the government, and the purpose was to begin to identify, even back then, the ethical and social issues that would be raised by AI. My involvement in the project was, at the beginning, passive. I sat in the back row. I was so interested in the project, but within 3 hours, I was invited to the front row, and I became part of the project, which was life-changing for me. And I was honored to be the report essayist on one subject called AI and Trust. How serendipitous was that? So what did we identify in that essay? What came out of the work project? Well, there were 4 perspectives represented. I won't go into them, you recognize them up here, but it was issues associated with the users and experiencers of AI on an individual basis. But there were also public questions, security and privacy, fairness, truth, and at that time, a very large concern about the use of potentially lethal autonomous weapons. There was a big focus on the nature of AI and human relationships and what that would mean. The potential for a sense of false empathy, and I'll come back to that later in the talk. And a real question as to whether or not AI, when it became so advanced, would be alignable with human values. Thank you. And finally, there was a question of trust in the people that were developing AI. Could society trust them to make all of the right decisions? This framework will be useful as we think about healthcare. But before we get into that, I just want to remind ourselves, this is more for me than for you, of just how much has happened in the last 12 years. The era of predictive AI began in 2016. This is what we know as machine learning, where you take oceans of data of all different kinds and shapes, and you have the ability to identify and predict based on the training and learning that goes on in there. And based on that training and learning, you perform very narrow tasks. And as we all know, when ChatGPT hit the scene, a whole new era began. Generative AI, the ability of a large language model to create fresh content of any kind in any form, and then a significant advancement to go beyond language into deep reasoning so that the models could not only create content, but could actually solve deep, complex problems. And we're about ready to enter the era of agentic AI. So it isn't just a brain in a jar anymore. It's a brain that has arms and legs and tools and can do things and can accept goals and be delegated to and make things happen. The potential for all of these we'll talk about in a minute. But the real goal of the people developing AI is to create artificial general intelligence. And not only to do it, but to do it soon. By 2030, 5 years from today, if we were having the symposium, we'd be talking about the advent of artificial general intelligence. Turning to healthcare, it has been a global priority for, a top priority for global AI companies. Microsoft said, healthcare is AI's most pressing application. Apple said, healthcare is the largest or second largest component of the economy. Alibaba has said, our goal is to leverage AI to meet the growing demand for equitable access to healthcare. And what are they focused on? 4 areas. Improve population health, improve the patient experience, improve and enhance the caregiver experience, and reduce significantly the rising costs of healthcare. So what has happened? Well, let's just remind ourselves, this is meant to be suggestive, obviously not complete. But that beginning phase of prescriptive AI, where specific tools were developed, have led to improvements in diagnostics, in the forecasting of viral spreads, and of course in the accelerated development of new drugs, in particular COVID, and of course we're all aware of AlphaFold, which was so powerfully built and was recognized with a Nobel Prize recently. If you turn to the generative AI area, just in the last 3 years, the impacts on patient records and the ability to do them has made it very automated, has led to a reduced burnout phenomenon with many doctors. Emergency triage has also been made to be fairer and faster. And of course, the diagnosis of complex diseases has also been enhanced by the use of generative AI. And if we look forward to the next couple of years that's coming with agents, we can imagine that we'll see advances in robotic assistance, the advancements of telehealth, where the agents will not only take calls, but make calls and be involved with people from around the world on a 24/7 basis. And of course, the application of agents to the caregiving world for nursing, for therapy, and in particular for elderly people is a real potential. And then if we look forward to the next 5 years, if AGI were to come, this is the goal in healthcare that the creators have in mind. They are imagining literally the earlier detection of all kinds of cancer and the development of immediate personal care in almost eliminating cancer. The ability to prevent, not just contain, but prevent pandemics. And of course, a tenfold improvement in the healthcare system itself. But with these benefits come those same unresolved trust issues that I mentioned that we identified 10 years ago. For users, and this is meant again to be suggestive, do I have a right to know that I am dealing with AI? Is when the doctor diagnoses my disease of whatever I have, is it sufficient that it is efficacious, or must it be explainable? And can my data be used to train AI? And on the public side, the questions about liability and accountability persist. If AI makes an error, whose fault? Who's liable? We're all aware of the inherent human bias that is built deeply into the data that is being used to train AI, and it leaves this lingering problem still unsolved of how to protect the marginalized communities around the world who are unfairly represented in the training data. And of course, the really powerful question of how do we make sure that the benefits, all of which we've been aware of, are equitably accessible by everybody around the world. And if we turn to the AI-human relationship category, this is one I feel deeply about. AI is essentially a benevolent sociopath. That's what it is. It has an ability to influence and push my buttons, but it has no buttons of its own. So the question is, am I better off if I feel better, or am I being emotionally manipulated? I don't know the answer to that. And if we look at what's going on with the young people around the world, AI is now exploiting what I call the loneliness market. These are people who start off developing a casual relationship with an AI, which subtly becomes a friendship, which might become a partnership, and may even become a spouse. There's pressure to do that. So this is leading, in my opinion, to a fundamental shift in the way personhood works. And I see it in children. I have 7 grandchildren. I worry about this, a big issue for me. And if we turn to the fourth category, which is, can you trust the experts? I think the answer is no. We can't totally trust the experts, but what we can do is focus on how are these models being built, And there are two competing philosophies on the development of AI. One is in closed system, proprietarily owned models. Most of the big players in the United States operate on this basis. OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, and others. The other approach is open source software. Meta, Facebook, is the biggest in the United States that does that. Mistral in Europe does it. And of course, everybody knows about DeepSeek. And DeepSeek is an open source system. So you have these two competing philosophies of how do you build the system? Should it be known or not known? If it's not known, then when we get to the ultimate goal, we're going to be in the hands, excuse me, a hostage to a very few powerful people. If it's open, the good news is it's open. The bad news is it's open to everybody, even bad actors. So there's a dilemma there to figure it out. But I think ultimately, the right answer is going to be open source software. And of course, we only have 5 years to figure out how to control AGI. So we're going to turn now to how do we control? What is the framework for this? I do not have an answer, but I would suggest that these three factors will dictate the framework that we have to work around. The first is figuring out how to balance the need for innovation to achieve all these benefits versus slowing down just enough to manage the risk. The second consideration is, do you deal with the known problems only, or do you allocate time to anticipate problems that are not here yet? Very tough question. The tendency is to do the former. The mission should be to do both. And of course, we have the age-old problem of do we attack these problems as a global problem or as a regional or a local problem? The ideal solution would be global. But if we waited for global solutions, we would have no solutions. So the practical and realistic answer is regional and local frameworks make a lot of sense unless and until you reach problems that can only be solved globally. In terms of what the framework should look like, this is a phrase everybody knows. Let's build guardrails, not stop signs. The progress is literally unstoppable. So the philosophy should be, I learned this from the banking system, the banks used to be run by rules, and they weren't run. They weren't regulated by rules. So we adopted what was called a principles-based regulatory environment. It allows adaptation, it allows the monitoring of progress that is made, and it allows the application of principles to individual circumstances. I think that's highly appropriate for the evolution of a bioethics framework. And finally, I would say we need to keep an eye on AGI. It's emerging. It's only going to be solved globally. And we got to slow down enough to do it, and we only have 5 years. So, some closing thoughts. First of all, CUHK, congratulations. You have convinced me that you are not only a thought leader, you are a role model for everything I've just been talking about. You've developed a regional approach to this that is deep, it's real, it's nimble, it's robust, and it reflects the Asian cultures and values that you cherish so deeply. But beyond that, you're seeking global collaboration. You're trying to find common ground with other regions, other cultures, particularly on the issues that can only be solved globally. So the Hastings Center is very proud of our partnership. We are here to celebrate 10 years of progress, and I can guarantee you that we're ready to take on you as partners on the challenges that lie together. So, I started with a personal thought. I'm going to end with a personal thought. This is a birthday message to my grandson, Fred, 5 years from now. I'm now 87, Fred. and you're 16, and your whole life is life ahead of you. AI, we've just been through 5 more years, has made the world healthier, safer, and fairer. And fortunately, we've had the good luck that all the needed guardrails are put into place. Or maybe not. One of those will be true. AGI has just arrived, so you're never going to die of cancer. Artificial superintelligence is coming next. That's both exciting and very scary, and it could either be heaven or hell. I only wish I could be there with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roscoe, for the wonderfully thought-provoking speech. The session is now open to the floor. For online participants, you can submit your questions using the chat function of the webinar, and we will consolidate your questions and address them in the later part of this Q&A session. May I first invite questions from the audience in the hall?
Derek.
It seems that recently in the field of AI, people are now pleading governments to use a more facilitative approach to governance, as in contrast to European approach of more control.
More rules.
Yes. And it also seems that because there's such fierce competition between countries, not just institutions, that there would be incentive for governments to relax control and regulations so that things can move fast. Is that a risk in itself?
I think so, and I think you're seeing it play out. I mean, I don't know where that balance should be struck. I don't. I do know that if you're overly restrictive, it won't work. And I think Europe has almost come to that decision. I think they maybe think they overregulated a little too soon. You know, somebody once said Henry Ford didn't put seat belts in the first car. And so you really have to wait to see things to come out before the real rules can come in. That's where I think a principles-based approach makes a lot of sense. In the US, I think the pendulum has been going like this. I think they had an eye on Europe, weren't sure what to do about it. Maybe we should do it. I think in the last months of the Biden administration, there were some rules that were put out. They weren't well received in the corporate community, even though they helped build them to some extent. And I think what you're seeing now is the pendulum swinging back. Having said that, I think wiser heads have to prevail. There has to be an ability to slow down enough. Whether or not that actually happens, I don't know. But I think to some extent, we're reliant on self-regulation to a large extent. And that sounds risky, and it is, as I said. But I also believe that deep within those corporate empires that are building all this, there's a lot, they're human beings as well. They know, particularly when you look at the existential risks, they know that there's a lot at stake. So they're putting a lot of their own time and energy into at least doing the best they can. But at the end of the day, they need society as partners.
Great, and we have a question in the back.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Roscoe, for a very inspiring talk. I'm Helen Mang. I'm one of the professors in the CUHK Faculty of Engineering, and I'm also a researcher in AI. I wish to ask, how do you see public education being a factor in your equation so that more people can understand what the technology is about, how it works, and therefore have a voice in all these ethical discussions, which are very complex?
That's a big one. I think, obviously, the universities have a major role to play. And but it has to go beyond the walls. I mean, I was so impressed by what's been going on at CUHK, reaching out to the schools. That's basically how you're going to have to do it. I think I mentioned at the beginning, I personally have built a little informal career just going around and talking to people up and down the East Coast of America. I give a talk called AI, the what and the so what. Here's what it is, and here are the issues that you should be thinking about as citizens, as parents, as grandparents, whatever. There's no solution. It's just, you got to keep doing it. But I do think, on an optimistic note, I do think that the political leadership around the world almost is coming to grips with this 5-year problem that we have. And I don't want to hammer that too much, but 5 years is not a long time. So I think you're going to see a lot of reach out from the universities, encouraged by thought leaders and political leaders.
I just want to say thank you for a very inspiring talk. It touches on a number of very important points in my heart, particularly the point you mentioned about exploitation of the market of the loneliness.
Yes.
And also the idea about fake or false empathy. How do we counter that kind of tendency, or are we really being too fussy? There's no such thing as false empathy. Empathy is empathy, whether from AI or from you or me. So what's your further thoughts on that?
That is so philosophical. I love the question, and it's why the question haunts me. I didn't say it's wrong. I said I wonder if it's wrong. Because the truth is, if I'm an old person that's established a deep, intimate, familiar, growing and improving and warm relationship with X, and X just happens to be something that doesn't have buttons that I could push, but can say words to me that implies that it does have buttons, so that I'm feeling the other side of the empathic relationship, is that really wrong? I don't know. I don't know. You tell me. I mean, I hope somebody else has figured that question out for me, because it's a deep one. Of all the issues up there, for me personally, that's the biggest one.
That's probably what Rogers Centre can work on in future for us, right?
And the next question?
Thank you so much for your great lecture. I know almost nothing about AI ethics, but so this is a very simple-minded question. I mean, about the risk or danger of AI posed to human beings. I'm just wondering, it struck me that there's such a risk if and only if AI can have interests or think itself to have interests. Do you think AI has interests like human?
Not yet, but that's the risk.
Okay.
People often ask me when I give my talks around, if I could read one book, what should I read? I used to have different answers. My current answer would be Genesis. I don't know if you've read it, but if you haven't, put it on your list. It was written by Henry Kissinger, Eric Schmidt, the ex-CEO of Google, and a man named Mundy, who was a chief scientist at Microsoft. It was finished about 2 months before Mr. Kissinger died. He wrote many, many books. He was very, very prescient, and I think it goes deeply into that question, and I think their answer is yes. That's why we have to worry about it.
And we have a question from this side.
Very much following what was asked before about false empathy and loneliness and AI. So can you elaborate? So you said it's one of the biggest issues that worries you. Can you say more about that? So are there any other issues other than false empathy, or that's really the only thing? And whether is that something, so you encourage CUHK to do something about it, is that something that the Hastings Center going to do?
I can't answer the latter. I'll let Vardit take that one on. But, you know, the loneliness market issue is a big one. There's a number of websites that your children, grandchildren, or even young people in their 20s and 30s can sign up on and establish a relationship, a one-on-one personal relationship, which starts out very sterile. It's a blank piece of paper, and you begin to develop this relationship. And millions of people are now involved in these relationships. And I worry about it because I think it feeds on the people who are least able to establish real human relationships. So it's not only the nature of the relationship it has with the AI, it's the fact that it's taken away the capacity or even the urge to develop relationships with real people. So it's a very withdrawing sort of thing. So it's, in my opinion, a form of mental illness. Yes, I think, one more question, I think they say, right?
Thanks, and you should feel free to pass on this, and if you do, then take another one. You expressed a lot of optimism in the end about the wisdom of political leadership, recognize the problems and regulate it. I'm from the United States.
Yeah.
Tell me what's happened in the last month that should make me feel confident that you're right about that.
Not much. Not much. You know, we had this conversation with the staff yesterday when we were getting together, and a thought came into my head, which is there's a thing in physics. If you want to go from here to there, we're frozen. What's going on now is the act of unfreezing. It's chaotic creation of whatever, but that creates an opportunity for refreezing in a completely different paradigm. So if you're an optimist, look past the situation of turmoil that we're in and try to imagine the refreezing paradigm that's going to exist post the turmoil. That's the best I can do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Roscoe, for the thought-provoking questions on site and from the webinar. We will now proceed to the keynote address. To introduce our distinguished keynote speaker, Professor Nancy Jecker, may I invite Professor Roger Chung, co-director of the CUHK Centre for Bioethics, to the stage. Professor Chung, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roscoe, for the very inspiring talk. And I was just really thinking when all these questions, very great questions were asked, all these philosophical questions. And if we really truly develop a relationship with an artificial intelligence that gives us artificial empathy, but if we feel good about it, and if the interaction is embodied, synchronized, and one-to-one, I think it is definitely less evil than this, which we're actually receiving thousands of pings and notifications that really break our attention from the really important work that we're doing. That this is what I feel, at least, at this moment. Now, it is my distinct honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Nancy Jecker. And Professor Nancy Jecker is a leading voice in bioethics, currently serving as Professor of Bioethics at the University of Washington School of Medicine. She also holds visiting professorships at the University of Johannesburg and here at the CUHK. Nancy's contributions to the field are immense. She has served as the president of the International Association of Bioethics and continues to contribute as a member of its board of directors. Her other accolades include being a Fulbright U.S. Scholar, 3-time Rockefeller Foundation Fellowship awardee, and a recipient of the Japanese Society for the Promotion of Science International Fellowship. Professor Jecker has been a keynote speaker at many prestigious conferences, such as the World Congress of Bioethics in UNESCO, with over 200 published articles and 5 books, including her recent work, What is a Person? Untapped Insights from Africa. Professor Jecker brings a wealth of knowledge and a global perspective to our gathering today. So in conclusion, allow me to say this, in a world where ethical dilemmas and AI and all these can make our heads spin faster than a centrifuge, Professor Jecker's voice in bioethics remains as robust as the centrifuge's core center and distills ethical debates into clarity and meanings. We're truly privileged to have Professor Jecker with us today to share her insights on lessons from Li, that is light in Chinese, a Confucian-inspired approach to global bioethics, her latest work that attempts to engage Asian and Chinese with Western ethics, and one that I'm very honored to have co-authored with. And that is why actually I try to match her talk today, because this is actually the Chinese tunic outfit, and with the Western shirt and tie. It is the fusion of two cultures, and that is also the theme for today. Please give a big hand to Professor Nancy Jacker. Thank you.
Good morning and happy 10th birthday to the CUHK Centre for Bioethics. It's a real privilege to be here to celebrate the 10th anniversary, and I want to express my gratitude to everyone who made this event possible, with special thanks to Roger Chung and Anne Lau. Thank you. So this presentation is based on a paper that Roger Chung and I co-wrote entitled Lessons from Lee, Confucian-inspired approach to global bioethics. Throughout the paper, we refer to Eastern and Western to indicate beliefs that are prominent in East Asia and the West, primarily Europe and North America. We do not mean to suggest that all or only people in these regions hold the views in question, or that they are pure or untouched by outside influences. So I'm going to begin with a poem, and it's written by Rudyard Kipling in 1889 and entitled The Ballad of East and West. I won't read the entire poem, but here is the opening stanza, which is also the closing stanza. Oh, East is East, and West is West, and never the twain shall meet. But there is neither East nor West, border nor breed nor birth, when two strong men stand face to face, though they come from the ends of the earth. Now the poem goes on to tell the tale of two men, a British colonel's son and an Afghan horse thief, who meet at a border during war. And the stanza, as you can see, is somewhat confusing. On the one hand, it warns, never the twain shall meet. On the other hand, it reverses. But there is neither East nor West, border nor breed, nor birth. What are we to make of that? East and West are both together, they meet, and apart, they never meet. I'll come back to this question at the end of my presentation. For now, I will venture to say that the shift from distant compass points to humans, face to face, mirrors changes underway in bioethics. Historically, geographically distant bioethicists had little contact, and never the twain shall meet. Today, bioethicists like us from far-flung places more often meet face to face in both virtual and in-person spaces. We also stand together through globalization, or increased cross-border flows of goods, services, money, people, information, technology, and culture. The consequences of globalization are that we are more tightly linked than ever before. For bioethicists, globalization has meant that bioethical problems are more likely to have cross-border impacts. The COVID-19 pandemic illustrates. For most of human history, the release of the tiny SARS-CoV-2 virus would not have led to a global catastrophe. Yet today, with international flights common, an individual waking up in Wuhan may find themselves falling asleep in London, facilitating the virus's spread. Now, beyond pandemics, bioethicists are increasingly engaging with concerns affecting people everywhere. Climate change, AI, gene editing, antimicrobial resistance, to name a few. As we face common problems, differences between East and West fall away. Despite this, diverse bioethics traditions also continue to stand apart, with principles and frameworks emanating from the West, especially the United States, often predominating. Critics compare Western bioethics to spreading the gospel. De Vries and Roth write, Western bioethicists are like the Christian missionaries from Europe and North America that preceded them, intent on bringing the gospel, the good news, to those in the developing world. Critics also charge that Western-style bioethics often becomes, quote, a process of integrating people around the world into a single society, emphasizing Americanization and Westernization. In this presentation, I'll be exploring how East and West stand together and apart, and I'll propose a consensus-building approach that I hope will bring East and West closer together. So I'll start off by asking, what is the current approach in global bioethics, and what possible concerns might it raise? Next, I'll ask, what might a broader and more inclusive global bioethics look like? And I'll close with what I call lessons from Lee. So what is the current approach? And there are different ways to answer this question. One way is to ask, who are the bioethicists? While the demographics of our field is understudied, what we do know suggests that as a group, bioethicists are unrepresentative of the global population they increasingly serve. In an analysis of who produces bioethics knowledge and what theories and concepts they draw on, Pratt and De Vries reported that the field's leading institutions and scholars are situated in the world's politically and economically dominant countries. Despite promising gestures toward diversity and inclusion, much of the work in global health ethics over the past 4 decades has drawn on theories, principles, values, concepts, and worldviews from the global north. Within our own countries, we are a privileged set, more educated and wealthier than the general population. A 2024 survey of US bioethicists showed that they tended to come from more educated families and are generally whiter, more liberal, and less religious than the overall American population. Evidence shows that relative to their proportion in the global population, authors from high-income countries produce a disproportionate share of the bioethics literature. A quantitative analysis of top-cited articles in bioethics journals between 1975 and 2014 found that 84.5% of top-cited articles were from the US, UK, or Canada. In another study, Bory and colleagues investigated the geographical distribution of bioethics articles published in 9 journals between 1990 and 2003, and they reported a similarly lopsided geographical distribution. You can see that the US, UK, and Canada, again, are the top 3 sources. And if you do the math, those 3 countries comprise 76.8% of articles in those 9 journals over the 13-year period. And the authors concluded that bioethics has a geographical bias. If we consider international bioethics conferencing, these biases persist. To give just a snapshot, one prominent example, Schmidt reported that at the 2022 World Congress of Bioethics held in Basel, Switzerland, participation rates were a little bit better, actually, 42% from high-income countries, 12% from middle-income countries, and 4% from low-income countries. So taken together, these findings align with Heinrich et al.'s general hypothesis that the cultural backdrop that informs not just bioethics, but many academic fields is weird, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. A robust body of evidence suggests that values associated with weird people differ appreciably from most of the world's population. Heinrich and colleagues summarize their findings about weird people this way. Weird people are, quote, a thin and rather unusual slice of humanity, highly individualistic, nonconformist, and analytical. We, referring to weird people, focus on ourselves over our relationships and social roles. We see ourselves as unique beings, not as nodes in a social network. When acting, we prefer a sense of control and the feeling of making our own choices. They go on to characterize people in weird societies as tending to look for universal categories and rules with which to organize the world, tending to stick to impartial principles, and showing less favoritism toward friends, family, co-ethnics, and local communities than other populations. In line with these claims, Fox and Swayze argued in an influential 1984 paper that the scope of bioethics is excessively narrow and North American-centered, contrasting it with the medical morality they observed as medical sociologists embedded in mainland China. Chinese medical morality, they claimed, tends to be rooted in the conception of the individual in relation to statuses and roles enmeshed in the network of human relationship. Every individual strives to meet their responsibilities and carry out their duties ever more totally and perfectly, guided by certain principles, inspired by exemplars, and in conformity with concrete rules. More recently, in that 2023 paper by De Vries and Pratt I mentioned, they suggested that many differences between Chinese medical morality and American bioethicists persist today. There is, they write, an epistemic hegemony of Eurocentrism which originated during the era of colonization and continues today. It is manifest, they continue, in the presentation of the works of a few European philosophers as universal truths, which leads to denying the possibility that these philosophical accounts were themselves located in particular historical moments and lived experiences. Exemplifying this concern, in a 2022 paper, Beecham and Childress champion their 4 principles of biomedical ethics: autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice, as, quote, universal norms shared by all persons committed to morality, and describe them as broad, abstract, and content-thin. In response to Hong Kong scholars who stress that Confucian ethics differs from Western ethics because it assumes duties and virtues related to filial piety, Beecham and Childress replied that Confucian ethics is, quote, certainly within the bounds of principles derived from the common morality and in no way contradicts them. Yet, notice, this seems to suggest that the 4 principles, not Confucian ethics, serves as the final arbiter for what ethical claims are justified. A last illustration of bioethics weirdness is UNESCO's Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Bioethics. The declaration aims, quote, to provide a universal framework of principles and procedures and affirms, quote, the interests and welfare of the individual should have priority over the sole interest of science or society. While the declaration recognizes solidarity as well as autonomy, it baldly states, quote, in no case should a collective community agreement or the consent of a community leader or other authority substitute for an individual's informed consent. Thus, despite calling for due regard for cultural diversity, the Declaration's core values are fundamentally individualistic. Rosemont asserts that a bedrock presupposition of the Declaration is that human beings have rights, an idea rooted in Western thought. Rosemont thinks that bioethics frequently draws from the culture of Western industrial democracies and regards them as the standard toward which all should strive. Together, these analyses show how social, cultural, and historical contexts shape our moral vision. So how might we expand that vision? I want to suggest that a broader view of global bioethics and what that might look like I'll start by considering 3 cases, and they all involve the concept of a person, which is a question I've been focused on for the last several of years. 3 cases, I want to describe Eastern and Western approaches, how they differ, and after laying out these differences, suggesting, and this is just a gesture, needs to be further developed, a way forward. So philosophers use the notion of being a person, personhood, to refer to having a superlative moral status, meriting respect, and deserving non-interference and a right not to be killed or destroyed. So this is something that has an outstanding moral worth. Leading Western views specify the requirements for personhood vis-a-vis a set of sophisticated cognitive capacities. According to these accounts, personhood is, quote, neither a relation the individual stands in, nor a capacity whose exercise requires participation of another. Instead, the qualities that underpin personhood are intrinsic to individuals. Exemplifying this view, Kantian ethics holds that what confers dignity and moral worth on individuals is rational agency and the ability to impose a moral law upon oneself. Also emphasizing sophisticated cognitive capacities, utilitarian ethics stresses capacities for suffering and enjoyment. Leading Eastern approaches regard personhood primarily in relational terms. Yu writes that in Confucian virtue ethics, a person is always conceived of as part of a network of relations. A person is always a person in relations. Bachover understands Confucian personhood as arising through the enactment of primary virtues in social roles and relationships. Thus, Ren, the virtue of loving kindness, compassion, or humanness, is expressed as an activity that, when practiced authentically, establishes one as a person and supports human flourishing. Yu and Fan write that people must develop and actualize their potential to mark themselves off from other animals. Indeed, if people do not cultivate moral virtue, they are little different from animals. So this table gives a snapshot summarizing key differences that I just mentioned between Eastern and Western conceptions of personhood. So from an Eastern perspective, personhood, we might say, is extrinsic. It's not something we find inside the individual in their brain, but it's outside in their relationships with others. It's something earned through cultivating virtues and moral excellence in these relationships. It's scalar, or a matter of degree, so one can be more or less of a person. It can change and hopefully increases as virtues develop across the lifespan. And it's derivative in the sense, or partly derivative, of relationships in which these virtues are displayed and enacted. So how do these distinct understandings of personhood shape perspectives in bioethics? How are they reflected or not reflected in international bioethics guidelines? Consider 3 cases: social robots, abortion, and climate change. And I'll start with social robots. We talked a little bit about false empathy a moment ago. So leading Western approaches to personhood suggests that social robots lack moral status in their own right because they lack the sophisticated cognitive capacities required for moral status in personhood. Exemplifying this approach, Curtis and Savalusky write, there is nothing in principle that prevents a machine from having a moral status, from being considered morally important in its own right, but it would need to have an inner life that gives rise to a genuine interest in not being harmed. Confucian ethics might also take the view that social robots are not persons, but for a different reason. They lack the ability to express virtues because they cannot act, or I should say they cannot yet act, as intentional agents with sincerity and good faith. Alternatively, I have argued with Fan that perhaps social robots do achieve personhood if they form relationships with us where we express Confucian virtues. How are Eastern and Western approaches manifest in international AI guidance? For example, consider the World Health Organization's Ethics and Governance of Artificial Intelligence for Health. The WHO identifies protecting human autonomy as the first of 6 key ethical principles for the use of AI in health. The report in particular expresses concern that the Declaration of Human Rights, which protects individual dignity, privacy, confidentiality, and informed consent, might be dramatically redefined or undermined by AI advances. Whoops. So I would suggest that to better incorporate East Asian approaches in international AI ethics guidance, the WHO might add something like this. AI is deployed within a social relational context in which AI-human relationships form and may hold value. Take another example, again involving this theme of personhood, prenatal human life, the moral standing of prenatal human life, and hereafter I'll refer to fetuses. Kwan interprets Confucian ethics as suggesting that human life is not valuable in itself, but rather acquires a value in the context of relationships. Yet Wang notes that 4 of 5 primary relationships in Confucian ethics are family relationships. So perhaps the fetus's status as a future family member carries moral weight. Finally, Fan stresses it is not enough to be conceived. One must form relationships and become a participant in the rites. Within the West, Wood defends a Kantian approach and rules out personhood for beings who have rational nature only potentially or virtually, or have had it in the past or have parts of it. Singer's utilitarian ethics focuses on the fetus's capacity for suffering and enjoyments. Singer holds that fetuses who have not yet developed this capacity for suffering and enjoyments have no moral standing of their own. Well, what do international ethics guidance say? The most recent 2022 World Health Organization abortion care guidelines call for safe and effective abortion care. Relevant for our purposes is that the WHO discusses the ethics of abortion services exclusively in terms of individual rights, emphasizing, for example, that unsafe abortion practices around the globe jeopardize the pregnant person's rights to health, non-discrimination, and life. So how might we amend that? Might include, for example, relational features salient in Confucian ethics. For example, that a fetus is situated within a pregnant person's body and perhaps within the context of future family relationships. Lastly, consider the value of nature. Confucian personhood highlights, again, relationships with nature and whether they can be morally good. Fan, for example, holds that neither individual humans nor other natural objects have a standing that can be appropriately appreciated in isolation. Wang explains Confucian views this way. We love both birds and animals on the one hand, and grasses and trees on the other hand. But it is bearable for us to feed birds and animals with grasses and trees. We love both human beings and birds and animals, but it is bearable for us to kill birds and animals, to feed parents, to sacrifice for rituals, and to entertain guests. Leading Western views tend to take a different approach. Kantian ethics describes no intrinsic worth to inanimate objects in nature because they lack the capacity for rationality. Utilitarian ethics likewise rejects any suggestion that inanimate nature is intrinsically valuable, since nature lacks the capacity for suffering or enjoyment. So how are these approaches manifest in international guidance on say, climate change? The 2023 Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change urged staying within the planetary boundaries required to ensure a safe operating space for humanity. In support of respecting planetary boundaries, the panel cites nature's contributions to people, such as food, medicine, and materials that promote human well-being. So we might include here consideration of the planet's relational value. Finally, I want to close by suggesting a way forward inspired by the Confucian virtue of Li. And it might be a little bit surprising in many ways to select this virtue to draw on. To explain, allow me to return to the poem with which I began. As I mentioned, this is both the first and the last stanza. In between, Kipling tells the tale of two men. I mentioned a British colonel's son and an Afghan horse thief during war. The horse thief has stolen the colonel's prize horse, and the colonel's son races into enemy territory to retrieve it. The horse thief soon outwits the young man and steals his horse. The colonel's son briefly threatens vengeance, but then stops and says instead, "Keep the horse, but take good care of her. She carried a man." Surprisingly, the horse thief returns the horse. The colonel's son next offers him the gift of his remaining pistol. Not to be outdone, the thief whistles for his only son to be a guide to the colonel's son. Together, the two sons, one British, one Afghan, one noble, the other a thief, ride off as companions. There is neither east nor west, border nor breed nor birth. So just as the two men use the rituals of giving gifts to express solidarity and a bond deeper than their differences, bioethics must find rituals to express important moral attitudes, including not just solidarity, but also tolerance, mutual respect, epistemic justice, cultural humility, and civility. We show these to one another through ritual practices that express them. For example, we convey tolerance by dialoguing with bioethicists who hold deeply different beliefs, by refraining from acts such as shouting down, interrupting, boycotting, dismissing, ridiculing, or otherwise deflating the testimony of others. We convey mutual respect by being curious and open to learning. We convey epistemic justice by including diverse bioethics voices in our conferences, publishing, funding, and training programs. We convey humility by signaling openness to changing our mind and hearing new evidence or arguments. And we convey civility by not dominating or overpowering the voices of those we disagree with, by showing politeness and amiability. I want to thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Jecker. We will now open the floor for questions. For online participants, you may submit your questions using the Q&A function. We will consolidate your questions and address them later in this Q&A session. May I first invite questions from the audience in the hall?
Thank you for a very illuminating lecture. I think that there's an ongoing ethical, cultural dilemma for Chinese people since perhaps the May 4th movement a century ago. And that is, in brief, how far do you want to value the traditional cultural values and keep the status quo versus taking a critical appraisal approach to traditional culture and move towards modernization? Some people would think modernization should not be westernization, but I think that's a separate question. It seems that, in my observation, it seems that in the past 5 years or maybe the past decade, there's a revival of Confucian values in mainland China. You can read from various sources, pop cultures, and also serious academics, with the intention of not building cultural humility, but rather cultural and national pride. Mm-hmm. So my question is, when you resort to appeal to Li as a sort of common language, what would that translate into in terms of perhaps encouraging a conservative status quo
approach in China and Hong Kong?
Thank you for that question, Dr. Al. That's a really important question, and it gives me an opportunity to clarify. In many ways, the selection of Lee, as I mentioned, is surprising because it does have some of these associations with traditional rituals and formal ceremonies. And we selected that quite deliberately to show that the values and traditions that we inherit to remain relevant and important in our lives need to be living traditions. We need to be self-critical, and we need to adapt them to changing times. So I see that not as a monolithic, something that we're trying to keep alive that is from another time and era, but something that we want to live and learn from and self-critically revise so that it remains relevant to our lives and the problems that we face today. So by appealing to classical Confucian virtues, I do want to press their relevance, but I also took a rather non-standard approach to examining them and exploring how to make them meaningful to some of the problems that we're facing today. And I tried to do that with the poem from the 19th century as well, right? It was written during a certain context with certain issues, but I think it rings true in those broad themes ring true and connect with some of the issues that we're facing, because these remain kind of human problems, and there is human ingenuity and I hope self-reflection and criticism to not necessarily make progress in a linear fashion, but to make them relevant and germane to the context in which we live. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Nancy, for your illuminating lecture. The theme is not unfamiliar. I think many people here in this hall might agree with you. And I don't know to what extent I agree or disagree with you, but as a devil's advocate, I do want to push back a little bit, if I may. And first of all, let me just point out that two very well-known Chinese philosophers who have taught in China and later at this university, Tong Junyi and Mao Zhongshan, they respectively resort to Hegel and Kant to eliminate on Confucianism. And even today, one of the most well-known scholars in that field is Shun Guanglai, who also taught here and now is at UC Berkeley chair professor. His PhD thesis referred to Aristotle a lot. And also there were other people who look at David Hume, the co-passion of David Hume, to talk about Mencius. And on the other hand, I do want to say that there are Western scholars, important ones, like John Rawls and Tim Scanlon, and their view is relational or reciprocal. For example, Scanlon holds that an act is impermissible if it cannot be justifiable to other people who are affected by the act. So it's in relation to other people. And also, finally, you talk about Singer being a Unitarian. Of course, he's a Unitarian, and he looked at animal in a certain way. And however, I think Singer's Unitarianism and his view on animals, the liberation of animals, are logically or conceptually independent. There's a paper by someone called Johann Frick, who is at UC Berkeley. His paper was called Singer Without Unitarianism. So I'm just wondering, what do you say to this views?
I'll have to read that one. That's quite an interesting title. I think when done well, I think global bioethics aspires not to just discuss in a compare-contrast sort of way these different traditions, but to bring them together in ways that are original and can create new understandings that are not so hidebound by any single tradition. Because there are elements of each that we want to include in the threads of our conversations and our debates and our values and concepts. And I think it's enriching when we can do that, not just, I didn't get very far in my presentation. There was almost too much compare and contrast. I think where it really starts to get interesting and enriching is where we take, we look critically at different traditions, and we bring forward the strengths, or what we consider to be the strengths, and leave behind, the embarrassments. So that I think that's how we can make progress in terms of a global bioethics. It's not that we're saying this tradition's better than this tradition, or this tradition, has to stay, but that we can bring them together and be creative and use human ingenuity. And that kind of global collaboration, I think, is where I hope the field is heading as we face these global problems. And I think we need to make some changes to get there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
May we take a few questions from the back, please?
Thank you. So I wanted to ask about publication in the context of lessons from Lee that you mentioned. Well, first of all, I want to ask about the study that you mentioned, showing most publication from the US. So are those, did they look at American researchers in the US, or did they look at, also Asian researchers in the US, right? So, is that a problem? One solution is just to bring people from the global south to the US to publish from there, or they get training there. So what did they mean exactly? What did they measure? But also in terms of, so if publication is a concern, most publications come, let's say, from researchers based in the global north, regardless of what we decide about training or not training. So how do we enhance the voices of not only people in Asia, but in the global south? So one difficulty, because, bioethical journals are mostly open to everybody, right? Everybody can submit for the not everybody can pay the price for those are open access, but most of our journals are not open access. So one of the difficulties is obviously language. So what do you think about that? Something that a solution can be, journals publishing in other languages like Arabic, Mandarin, etc., or journals or universities get funding translation into English. But other than language, which is an obvious challenge, what about other challenges? Why aren't Asian or researchers from Global South submitting to bioethics journals?
There are many questions there. Thank you very much, Zohar. Okay, the first one that I heard, if I understood your question correctly, was related to the study that I cited. I cited several studies indicating a geographical bias in the distribution of publications in top journals over a period of time. And those are based on the self-reported affiliations of the authors. So does it reflect someone who really has a sub-Saharan African perspective, but they happen to be working in Oxford? Well, that might or might not show up depending on what affiliations they list. And there are all kinds of things that influence the listing of affiliations, as you know. So the study, I think, captured more or less accurately. I think it gave, and the convergence of different studies that I cited, gave a picture that I think sort of rings true to what I see when I look at the literature. So moving on, I would say one more thing about the studies I looked at is that if you dig in a little bit and you look especially at the ones that are more longitudinal, there is an evolution, there is a change over time where there's a broader geographical distribution. And I saw that as a really good sign, that the trend was going in the right direction. I think we need to keep it going in the right direction. One of the challenges is that as journals become increasingly open access, which is a good thing because not everyone is affiliated with an institution that can afford this price of subscription to these journals and has access to them. But the challenge of that is that authors have to pay the article processing fees, and if they're not part of a grant or an institution that covers them, that can be an exclusion. I come from a high-income country, but my salary is fully state-supported, and I don't have any funds for open access. So it's through my affiliations with some other universities that I'm able to cover some portion of them. But it's a challenge, and it can't be taken as a given that everyone can step up and pay for that. So there are many challenges, not one. You mentioned language, which of course is a very important barrier and builds in biases in terms of our concepts and our moral vocabulary, how we see the world. Certain things just can't be translated. There is no translation. So you can circle around it, but you can't quite capture it. And I've encountered that a lot. Unfortunately, I don't speak many languages. And so it's a real barrier that I run up against. And I'm always awed and impressed with people that can speak so fluently and do philosophical and bioethical inquiry in a language that is not their own. I find that mind-boggling. So that is a challenge. How do we respond to that challenge? I'm not sure there's one right answer. We sort of need to take perhaps as many approaches as we can. One is to offer translation services to people whose publications are accepted, and to lobby journals that we're affiliated with, where we serve on the boards or as editors, to do that and to support those that do. The other is to have journals that are in multiple languages, and there are journals in other languages, of course, besides English. And so I think we probably need a little bit of all of the above and more to overcome those barriers. Global bioethics is really hard work. It's gotten a little bit easier because of the virtual aspects of AI, actually. I wrote a book that Dr. Cheng mentioned, What is a Person, that's coming out in a couple of weeks. And I wrote that book with a colleague who at the time was in Ghana, and we had never met. We had planned to meet at a conference I was organizing in Tanzania. COVID came, and we kept meeting online, and we wrote an entire book. This book coming out, What is a Person, Oxford University Press, I recommend it. We never met throughout the entire book, and right to the point where we're penning the last, chapter. I met him just this summer, after the book was in production. So I think in some ways it's easier than it's ever been to engage in global bioethics practices, and I encourage cross-border. But at the same time, there are challenges of the sort that I tried to describe or touch on in the presentation, to really being open to other views that are deeply different from our own. And it really requires that kind of curiosity. But I think it's gotten more doable, so I'm optimistic.
Can I quickly chime in here, Nancy? So, when I first started to be an academic, I was doing my PhD, I was actually told not to ever submit journal articles to our national or local journal, because it's not, what they say, is not going to be counted for substantiation and promotion. So here you go. Here's a systemic problem that we face. And I think AI can actually come in, well, because who can honestly say that those articles that are published, the research studies and findings that are published in these local and national regional journals are not important and pertinent to our conversations and what's important in today's world. We can't say that. I'm sure there are a lot of good stuff in there. So that's why I think AI can come in here. It would be great if, just imagine that if you publish in some Hong Kong or Chinese journal, automatically someone from another place can read it and understand them in their own languages. I think that's where AI can contribute. Thank you.
May we take one last question from the gentleman at the back?
Thank you. My name is KP Seng. I am an advocate for patients with rare disease. Thanks so much for your insightful speech. I personally participate in some ethics committee to vet the clinical trial protocols. But for bioethics, it is a totally new topic to me. This is the first time I hear about the term bioethics. And in your speech, you talk about now most Western countries and academics are dominating the field of bioethics. Also, we hear about East meets West many times today. So I think this would be a global field for the human to understand or practice bioethics. My question is that in terms of religions, in particular, Catholics and Christians and Islamics, they may have quite highly different moral standards or ethical standards or in practices. So when you talk about to build up the global bioethics guidance, I think is it challenging and in terms of religions, it is some challenges and not easy to make it happen, or not a very practical global bioethics guidance. Thank you.
I'm glad you raised that point about, cultural differences, of course, include differences in religion, and they can be very different approaches as a source of moral thinking and a source of bioethics. I think they create challenges and they might put people at odds with one another, but I also think that we can't sort of leave religion at the door because it so fundamentally informs the values and beliefs of so many people around the world. And not just religion and formal religious affiliations. You mentioned Christianity and Islam, and of course Judaism, the traditional major world religions, but also people that don't identify with a religion as a formal affiliation, but they are spiritual in their beliefs, and that informs their values and how they want to live their lives, and how they want to relate with others, and how they want to, the decisions they want to make in a healthcare setting. So I think we need to have the door open to as many different sources as we can, because they are relevant to the fundamental value questions that we face in bioethics. And I don't think that we've done the job that as good as we can, perhaps. There's a debate ongoing in the field about the role of religion in bioethics and whether it has a role at all. It's very controversial. There's been a tendency of late to eschew religious approaches and to try to be secular, and to request that those who bring religious premises in their arguments translate these to a language that everyone can participate in. And I think that that's controversial, and we're continuing to think about that, because I think that there are, again, problems of translation. As Dr. Letterman pointed out, with going from one language to another, something is lost. And I think some of the richness and thickness of these, these concepts and ideas when we try to do that translation. So I would throw the door open to those approaches and perspectives, and I've argued as much. Thank you for raising that question.
Thank you again, Dr. Jecker. And thank you to the audience for the thoughtful questions. We will now take a short break, and refreshments will be available outside of the hall, so please partake. The next session will begin at 11:25, so please return to the hall a few minutes beforehand. Thank you, everyone, for your attention. Welcome back, everyone. So now we'll move on to the distinguished lecture. May we have Dr. Ann Lau, co-director of the CUHK Centre for Bioethics, to introduce our speaker, Professor Vardit Revitsky. Dr. Lau, if you will please.
Thank you, Yoshi. So we changed topic a little bit after listening to AI and also global ethics. And it's really my great privilege to introduce our distinguished speaker, Professor Vardit Revitsky. Professor Revitsky is a prominent figure in the field of bioethics and currently serves as the president and the CEO of the CUHK Centre, one of the world's most influential bioethics research institutes. She is also a senior lecturer on global health and social medicine at Harvard Medical School and was previously a full professor at the Bioethics program, School of Public Health, University of Montreal. Professor Rawitsky has made remarkable contributions to the field, having published over 200 articles and commentaries and delivered over 300 talks globally. Her research focuses on the ethics of genomics reproduction and the use of AI in health. So today, she will be sharing her expertise on current and emerging prenatal testing technologies, bioethical implications. We are so honored to have her with us today, and I'm confident that her insights will inspire thoughtful discussion on the bioethical challenges we face. Professor Rawitsky, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lau. I'm so honored and delighted to be here. And I want to start by recognizing our host, Dr. Edgar Cheng. And Edgar, I want to say a word. It's a 10th anniversary about the anticipatory vision that you had over 10 years ago in recognizing the need, the importance of bioethics in Hong Kong, bioethics leadership here in the region. David invited us to think 5 years into the future. I'll take us 10 years into the future, into the 20th anniversary of the Center for Bioethics. And what I'm envisioning is CUHK, the Hastings Centre, and other partners as global connectors that promote a bioethics informed by cultural frameworks to enhance the well-being of communities and individuals everywhere. So I'm delighted and honored to be here, and I hope to be invited in 10 years again to the 20th anniversary. Thank you. The beautiful musical piece this morning, Nancy's talk, focused our attention on the meeting of East and West. So before I start analyzing my topic, I want to say a word of where my research is situated in that context. I've been writing and thinking about the intersection of reproductive decision-making and genomics technologies for decades. And listening to this perspective, I started thinking how this intersection represents such an interesting meeting point between East and West for at least two reasons. One is that in the West, any advance in genetic technology has the shadow of eugenics hanging over it, is intrinsically suspect to some degree. The shadow of Nazi ideology and other Western historical elements make us concerned when we run forward with implementing these technologies. I'm not an expert, but the conversations I've had here and with colleagues make me believe that the discourse in the East is quite different, that the discourse around a good birth, the pursuit of a healthy baby, is less burdened by that shadow, and that's one topic that I hope will emerge in our discussion. The other element is that the literature, the bioethics literature on reproductive ethics and genomics in the West is so individualistic. Reproductive autonomy is the guiding light, and the framing is so often the pregnant woman is making decisions, or not, about her body, and either she should have full control over what happens with her pregnancy, or she's competing with her fetus. There are two individual entities here, and the question is whose interests are going to prevail. But the framing is individualistic. And when I talk to families from Eastern contexts, they talk about these decisions as a family affair, and not just of the couple, of the extended family. And so the framing here is very relational and very different. I want to keep these 2 points in mind as I start my talk, because my talk is framed in a very Western way. I'm speaking through the lens of the traditional Western bioethics literature, and I want to keep an open mind that there are other ways of approaching these questions that I hope we will explore together. A few months ago, Harvard Medicine magazine ran a series of articles about risk, how we deal with risk in medicine. And they called me and asked if I would do an interview about how we cope with risk in the context of prenatal genetic testing. And it was published. When I had the sort of free conversation with the journalist, a personal story came up. And of course, as journalists do, she took the narrative and put it up front in the beginning of the article. So I thought I'll kick off with this personal story because narrative has a lot of power to really kind of bring us into the ethical tension and the ethical dilemma. So this is me pregnant at the age of 40. And like most women, I went through genetic screening of my fetus. And then I got a phone call that I am considered at high risk because there's a risk of 1 in 200 that my fetus has trisomy 21. Typical for that age. Interesting that it's framed when you get the phone call as a risk, already a negative result, right? A scary result. It's not a chance. Okay. So I wanted to know more. I was eager for certain information, not because I knew what I would do with it, but because I wanted to know. And then it was explained to me that the only way of getting better information, more reliable than a risk information, is the needle. I would have to undergo an invasive test that is associated with the risk of miscarriage. Why is 1 in 200 such a magical number that it became the threshold for high risk? Because the risk of the test is 1 in 200 of losing your very desired pregnancy. Now, if you think about it for a minute, these are two completely different risks that are completely unrelated. The risk of the fetus having a condition and the risk of losing that fetus have nothing to do with each other, but we had to pick some random number, arbitrary number, to cut a threshold for what's considered a risk that justifies this test, and we picked the same number as the risk of miscarriage. That put me in a terrible, me and my partner, in a terrible position. We wanted better information. We did not want the risk of losing the pregnancy. So we did what all couples do. We went for genetic counseling. And during the counseling session, all of a sudden, the genetic counselor got all stressed out, ran out, came back and said, we messed up. We miscalculated your risk. It's actually 1 in 40. Now think for a minute about what risk means. I'd rather use the word chance to be more neutral, but that's how clinicians communicate with patients. They talk about risk. What does risk mean to us? For us, it's 1 or a 0 or 100. Either our fetus has the condition or it doesn't. How do you apply risk to yourself is an ongoing struggle in medicine and in life in general. Now, if I told you you have 1 in 40 risk that the flight you're about to board will crash, would you board the plane? But if I told you you have 1 in 40 risk of winning the lottery if you buy this ticket, would you buy it? So context matters, personality matters, cultural values matter. Risk is a very complex notion, and we put pregnant women and their families for decades in this dilemma of if you want better information, you have to take a risk, and you're comparing two types of risks that are apples and oranges. I didn't know what to do. We didn't know what to do. And the clock is ticking when you're pregnant, right? Every day that goes by, your fetus is older and the window is closing. So I talked to families about what it means to raise a child with trisomy 21. And this is the daughter of my friend Stephanie. She made this beautiful image that says, I wouldn't change her for the world, but I will change the world for her. And she said, Verdid, the issue is not raising a child with trisomy 21. It's a beautiful experience. Our family is flourishing, but the world is going to be tough. There's stigma, there's discrimination. You will feel blamed for making that decision, sometimes even within the medical establishment. So be prepared. You're going to need moral courage. You're going to need to advocate for your child. So we were thinking about what to do. And as a bioethicist working in reproductive ethics, all my training emerged. I had access to the best genetic counseling in the world. The director of the genetic counseling program at the NIH was a friend. I could pick up the phone and get the best advice, but there was no better advice. I was facing this dilemma and I had to make a decision. So I thought about Raina's Rapp classical book from 1999, Testing Women, Testing the Fetus. She interviewed many women who faced my dilemma. And she coined the term of women as moral pioneers. She said women are burdened with these really excruciating decisions for their own families, but also for the future of society. Women have become the guardians, sort of the gatekeepers for who gets to be born and what our future society looks like. She also revealed to us that once a technology exists, you can't avoid it. There's no way to not make a decision. You can make a decision to reject it or to accept it, but you have become responsible for a decision. And I also thought about the Hastings Centre, by now classical report, the Disability Rights Critique of Prenatal Genetic Testing, that coined the term the expressivist argument and said that if women like me choose not to have a child with a genetic condition, we're expressing a societal message that is insulting and hurtful to people living in society with that condition. So now not only am I in the corner with my risk analysis and a decision for my family, a decision that I would make also has societal implications because it sends a message to everybody around me, which of course I do not intend to send. I am just trying to make a decision that is right for my own family. So going through this excruciating thought process personally, and knowing the literature that explains the societal and the long-term implications of this decision made me think that maybe the solution is better counseling. Maybe we just need to explain to parents in a complete, balanced, and neutral way what they are facing. And empirical research shows that that is not the case. Clinicians give medical information, they hardly provide societal, cultural context surrounding these decisions. So we wrote a book chapter that tries to explore what it would mean to provide complete, balanced, and neutral information, and discover that it's extremely complex. Even if you're trying hard, and that is your intent, and you're very well trained, it's very conceptually difficult to understand what it means to be balanced and neutral when it comes to these reproductive decision-making. So there I am with my dilemma. I won't tell you what I decided to do, what we decided to do, until the end of the talk, because I'm now in the great place of being between you and your lunch. So I have to keep you engaged somehow. So I'll tell you this at the end of the story later. But a few years later, as I was still angry about women finding themselves in that ethical corner, burdened with this status of moral pioneers, NIPT, non-invasive prenatal testing, entered the scene. And now I want to describe what the technology is, how it changed the landscape of the dilemma that I'm describing to you, and then I will offer a summary of an analysis that we performed on how this technology was implemented around the world, and that will go back to some of the tensions between East and West. So in 1997, a discovery was made that during pregnancy, the fetus, through the placenta, releases tiny fragments of DNA into maternal blood. These are not fetal cells. These are just fragments of DNA outside of the cell. By the way, researchers for years have been looking for fetal cells in maternal blood for testing, and it was a very biologically difficult task. One interesting thing, okay, we'll get to it in a minute. This discovery actually happened right here. And the person behind this amazing discovery that has Nobel Prize written all over it is your own Professor Dennis Lowe, now your president. And luckily, in 2017, Derek invited me to this beautiful conference, and I had a chance to meet Dennis and discuss with him, and we thought of writing a paper together because he was very interested in the ethical implications of his technology. What NIPT actually does is it detects those fragments of DNA in maternal blood as early as 9 weeks gestation. Now, all of you sitting here, you have fragments of DNA circulating in your blood. They're your own. When you get pregnant, 10 to 15% of that cell-free circulating DNA comes from the fetus and can be relatively easily detected. So now I'm going back to fetal cells. Fetal cells remain in the body of the woman after birth. Do you know for how many years? Almost forever, about 20 years. And why is that a problem from prenatal testing? Because if you get a positive result and you have more than one child, you don't know if you tested the current fetus. Lo and behold, cell-free DNA clears from the woman's blood within 2 hours after birth, ensuring that you're detecting the current pregnancy. So this is literally evolution's gift to prenatal testing because it's almost designed for that. And when I remembered my excruciating dilemma, I felt, hallelujah, this is the holy grail of prenatal testing. Good information without invasive testing, without a risk of miscarriage. So I stayed up all night and wrote this paper, and it was called Diagnosis at the time. We thought it would be diagnostic. Non-invasive prenatal diagnostic, an ethical imperative. And I said in the paper, we cannot delay. We have to implement this technology as fast as possible because this is what women have needed for decades and did not have. This is the holy grail. But then the ethical issues started emerging. And it became clear that this is more complicated than we thought. And I got engaged in a Canadian national study that has been going on for more than 10 years now, where the government gave us millions of dollars to look at how to implement this technology into the Canadian healthcare system in an ethically responsible way. And that gave us an opportunity to look at the societal implications, the implications for women's autonomy, for families, for communities, etc. We published dozens of papers out of this study. I am happy to share all of them. But I want to show you how NIPT entered the landscape. Here's a pregnant woman like me. Here are the traditional screening tests, usually 2 blood tests at 2 different times, an ultrasound combined through an algorithm into that famous 1 in 200, 1 in 40. You get that result, and then you're offered invasive testing with risk to get diagnostic information in order to know the status of your fetus with certainty. But the Canadian example shows us that if you have about 500,000 pregnancies a year and about 300,000 of them are screened, you will end up with about 10,000 amnios, and about 70 fetuses, tragically, will be lost in order to detect about 270 cases of trisomy 21. And I'm focusing on trisomy 21 because it's the most prevalent test. There are, of course, other conditions that we're testing. It just becomes very complicated. So where NIPT entered the scene is here, as a second-tier test. The women who were identified by the classic tests as high risk were offered NIPT. That was the first generation of this technology. In many countries, it's still the case. It's offered as a second-tier test. And look what that did in Canada. It reduced amnio from 10,000 to 300, maintained almost the same detection rate with only 1 fetal loss. So this was a great technology. Women wanted it. Women were paying for it out of pocket, hundreds of dollars, until it entered gradually universal healthcare in some systems. The big question now is, can we use this as a first-tier technology? Is this good enough to test all pregnant women, regardless of their level of risk as previously established? And in some countries, it's already offered in this way. And obviously, the dream would be a one-stop shop where you don't need invasive testing at all, because NIPT will perform so well that it will give you all the information that you want without invasive tests. Just to be clear, NIPT is currently only a screening test, but for trisomy 21 for Down syndrome, it can tell you with 99.9% certainty the status of your fetus. So for many women, as you can tell by the numbers, if you gave them that information, they will forego amniocentesis and avoid the risk. Parenthesis, justice issue. In countries where this is still only privately offered, women who can afford it can skip the needles. Women who cannot afford it are subject to the risk. So that is a serious equity issue. So NIPT today is performed using different techniques. Its performance is rapidly evolving. I don't want to talk about the technology, but I will mention that for fetal sex, it's 100% accurate. Well, think about it if I'm a woman and there's fragments of Y, it's not for me. It can detect blood type, trisomies, sex chromosome abnormalities, single gene disorders, microdeletions, syndromes. Sex detection is very relevant for this region because in some countries here it's illegal to perform. But this test is so easy that you can almost purchase it across border. So this is an entire other ethical complexity that I will skip for now. But what's interesting is that you can conduct whole genome sequencing with this technology. Technically, at 9 weeks gestation, still in the first trimester, you can have access to an unreal amount of information about your fetus. What do you do with that? How do you process that? How do you counsel about it? Pregnant women, once again, there was this new technology that was supposed to enhance their autonomy and their decision-making, and more information and more knowledge is more power. But the reality is that everybody's overwhelmed and clinicians are really scared of the future of this technology because the amounts of information, it's a complete informational overload and decisional paralysis. Two main ethical issues that we have been addressing. One is that invasive testing is only carried out for conditions that are considered serious enough to justify the risk of the needle. But if you have a test that is risk-free and an ability to test earlier in the pregnancy, what happens to the threshold of appropriate testing? Will individuals wish to test for or even be pressured to test for less severe conditions, late onset conditions, non-medical information such as sex and paternity? NIPT is used a lot for that. Or maybe even physical and behavioral and personality traits. So we're entering the eugenic kind of dimensions of reproductive genomics very quickly because of the nature of the technology, because of its advantages, it creates additional risks. The other issue is decision-making. Routinization is usually considered the greatest success of a technology. It's offered to everybody. It's a part of universal healthcare if you have that in your country. But routine use creates an expectation of uptake. And in the prenatal context, the notion that women would feel an expectation of uptake, that they would feel pressure to test. And some women told me in interviews, with amnio, I could hide behind the risk to avoid testing. I could say that I'm not testing because I'm protecting my pregnancy. The truth is that I don't want to know. I don't want to medicalize my pregnancy. I want to accept any child. But the medical pressure to test is such that I needed to hide behind the excuse of the risk. And now they took away that excuse. And now with no risk, I feel even more pressure to test. So NIPT, while desired by most women and welcomed by the medical system, does pose a threat to women's free choice, hence to reproductive autonomy, and we need to find ways to ensure women are offered NIPT and feel free to decline it. NIPT has been the fastest spreading genetic technology ever. I showed you that it was discovered in '97, started being sold as a private product in 2011, and it's now present practically in every country in the world and integrated into healthcare systems in many countries that can afford it. So we were asked to conduct a global cross-cultural analysis, and that was when I approached Professor Dennis Lowe and asked him to work with us on the situation here. The paper was published 4 years ago in the annual review, and Olivia Yang participated. She used to be with your center, and she helped us with this analysis. What we did was describe the implementation of NIPT in 9 countries. We couldn't include the whole world. Australia, Canada, China and Hong Kong, India, Israel, Lebanon, Netherlands, UK, and US. And if you look at the list of these countries, you can already see the richness of cultural frameworks and different types of healthcare systems. For each of these countries, the paper addresses the structure of the healthcare system, universal or not, how prenatal testing is usually offered, how NIPT is offered, counseling needs and resources, cultural and legal context regarding disability rights and pregnancy termination. So this is a very rich paper. I will not be able to summarize all of it. I'm inviting you to read it, but I wanted to share with you just a few similarities between countries and differences. The first similarity was that in all countries that we analyzed, cost was seen as a serious barrier to equitable access, of course. Especially in countries that do not offer public funding. And we found that women, families took loans, managed to find the funds to pay for this in order to avoid amniocentesis. This is a very desired technology. So when public funding is offered, it strongly supports prenatal testing, and it's because of the expectation to prevent certain births, certain conditions. The issue with public funding is the increased pressure and the expectation. It's almost as if your government is sending a message that you should do it. Otherwise, why are we paying for it? So that was a concern that we heard from families. So it's important to frame NIPT in terms of good information, preparation for birth, not just focus on NIPT as a one-way street towards termination. That is very important. Cost effectiveness. Public funding is endorsed by users and is a key to promote equitable access. But in some countries, or in all countries, the resources are limited. So the question is, how do you pay for it? And many countries conducted an analysis to decide how to fund this technology. And they wanted to show that they're saving money elsewhere in order to cover this new cost. If you reduced amniocentesis from 10,000 to 300, you saved a lot of money on amnio, and you can channel that towards NIPT. But what if you want to offer NIPT to all women? So that was the case in the UK. They did a public consultation, and they ended up having to consider whether to take a deep breath, calculate the savings of care of all the children with Down syndrome that will not be born, which is millions, and say to the government, see all this money that you're saving by preventing those births, this can be channeled into NIPT. And the ethical issue here is glaring because you're actually putting a price tag on lives and justifying the funding of a technology by preventing those lives. So I wrote this paper in the Hastings Center report way before I joined, describing this shifting landscape of prenatal testing. And I argued in this paper that we must never, ever ethically include savings associated with prevented lives in our calculation of how to fund a technology. The line stops at birth. You're saving money during pregnancy and you want to fund another technology, fine. But don't calculate what happens after births. That is devaluing lives. Another similarity was in the shortage of appropriate resources that promote informed choice, such as counseling. We have a shortage of trained professionals. We have a shortage of good informational material. This can be fixed, but it depends on resources. And as the number of conditions NIPT can test increases, creative and innovative counseling mechanisms are required. NIPT now tests for dozens of conditions. It's sold in packages, and women hardly get any counseling explaining what these conditions would mean for their prospective child. We wrote this paper arguing that providing unrestricted access unrestricted access to testing does not translate to enhanced autonomy. As I said, it's informational overload, and many families find it really paralyzing and excruciating to make decisions in the presence of too much information. I'll end with two differences that we found between countries, and I hope this will trigger a discussion of East-West cultural perspectives and value systems. A major difference had to do with attitudes towards disability. And these were not necessarily associated with the status of NIPT implementation. So I'll give an example. I'm originally from Israel. In Israel, everybody wants the healthy/perfect baby. Terminations are done for conditions that in other countries are not even tested because they're not considered serious enough. So Israel does not usually exhibit high tolerance for disability. What I hear from my we have an Israeli clinician in the crowd. What I always hear from Israeli clinicians is, life is hard enough, have a healthy baby. That's the attitude. At the same time, NIPT is not covered by the government yet. So it doesn't necessarily align. In some countries where the very high tolerance for disability, NIPT is covered. In some countries that triggered resistance from disability advocates that demonstrated against NIPT. In other countries, disability advocates were silent or even encouraged the implementation. So we didn't see a correlation between the status of NIPT and the approaches towards disability. And the last difference is very obvious, attitudes towards pregnancy termination. Even in the US right now, this is shifting. It depends on the state. Political context surrounding abortion vary greatly across countries. In some countries, NIPT was available, but there was no access to safe and legal abortion, such as Lebanon. People used the technology and ended up terminating the pregnancies that they wanted to terminate, but not in a legal and safe way. What are the ethical aspects of offering a genetic technology in the absence of termination, where empirically you know that many people using the technology will seek an abortion? So it just, everywhere you look with this technology, you open more and more Pandora's boxes related to the ethical implications of doing it right, which is what we tried to do in Canada. And I want to end, we're being very futuristic today. Everybody throws us into the future. My daughter is now 17. I think if she has, when I say when you have kids, she stops me and says, Mom, if I have kids. If she has kids in 10 or 20 years, I think NIPT will be offered in a routine way with whole genome sequencing. And I think that just like ultrasound made the uterus transparent and revolutionized our perception of the fetus, we all have our little pictures of our fetus before it's born. And I don't know if you've done 3D ultrasound. We have done it with our son, and it was literally like meeting the baby before birth. The ultrasound revolutionized our perception of pregnancy because we now expect to see inside the uterus. And I think whole genome NIPT would make the fetus itself transparent. It will create a cultural expectation to see inside the fetus, not just inside the uterus. And that is truly the world of Gattaca. That is a world where we have all the information about our prospective children, and we choose who gets to be born and who doesn't, and we have full control over the identity of society. So I promised you the end. Our daughter was born. This is her at a young age. And even though I was very old when she was born, I still had time to have her little brother. And here they are in one of their birthdays. We really wanted to welcome her. We didn't do the test, and we wanted to welcome her as she came. And we were absolutely ready in every way to have a child with trisomy. And after she was born, I didn't even know if she had or not. My husband had to go find a doctor to come into my room a day later to tell me. She is obviously loved, and we're delighted that she was born, as well as her brother. I sometimes worry about the world in which they will have their children. Thank you so much, and thank you to our team.
Thank you, Professor Ravitsky. We will now open the floor for questions. For online participants, you can submit your questions using the Q&A function of this webinar. We will then consolidate your questions and address them later in this Q&A session. May we begin with the questions from the audience in the hall?
Thank you. It was a really fascinating talk. I have one question and one challenge. So my question is, you never mentioned CVS. I had CVS when I was pregnant with my third child because it was non-invasive and didn't risk losing the pregnancy. I mean, you do have to take cells, but unlike amniocentesis, they didn't say it can end your pregnancy. And the reason I wanted to have it was because my obstetrician had amniocentesis and lost the pregnancy and was fairly devastated about it. Do they still do chorionic villus sampling? For those of you who think I'm talking about a drugstore.
Yes, they still do it, but I'm very surprised by your question, Bonnie, because it is invasive and the risk of miscarriage is higher than with amnio. So you were not counseled properly. So I didn't mention CVS because it's so alike.
It would have been an early pregnancy loss, yeah. And you didn't mention it because
it has the same or higher risk of pregnancy loss. So it's this.
But you don't
same problem.
Lose it after you've already kind of gone through the almost.
It doesn't solve the problem like NIPT does because NIPT has no risk of miscarriages. CVS has a similar or higher. So that's why I just skipped it.
Okay. The challenge is this. You showed the picture of the little girl. I wouldn't change her for the world, but I will change the world for her. I will try to change the world for her. I was on that working group in 1999, and I want to tell you there's equal pressure on the other side. Oh, you wouldn't consider having a child with a serious disabling condition? I guess you're not a very good parent. So I just want to say that, and I want to add to that also, I'm blanking out now on what dietary thing you need to have to reduce the risk or prevent having a child with spina bifida. Folic acid, there you go, thank you. Would you take a folic acid pill during your pregnancy?
Okay, I want to respond to your, I don't fully understand the question about folic acid, but I do want to go back to the working group. This is a paper that, you are my reproductive ethics guru. I'm honored to be speaking when you're in the room, and I know that report by heart. I've been teaching it for decades. It's clear, and it was a part of what I tried to convey, that we developed these technologies to give women more power, more reproductive power, and we trapped them. We cornered them. If you do the test, you're a bad potential mother because you don't accept children as gifts and you're not open and loving enough. If you reject the test, you're an irresponsible mother before you even became a mother, because how can you reject a good technology, especially if it's safe? How can you choose not to know and act on your knowledge? So when Raina Rapp said moral pioneers, she didn't just mean we're now empowered to make decisions, we're blazing the path of, she meant that we are now trapped, that no matter what we choose to do, there will be some type of social critique and ethical critique targeting us. That you cannot go through pregnancy without making decisions because no decision is a decision in the face of the technology. And no matter what decision you will make, some group within bioethics or advocacy will criticize you.
Well, I think there actually is a way out of that trap, and it's sort of similar to the question of whether women should stay home and devote themselves to motherhood and family, or whether they should have a career. And I say, I think women should choose what they want to do. And I think everybody else should, shut up. But
great. Thank you for that.
Yes.
And that is the ultimate Western response. Women are individuals, they're independent, they're free and empowered, and they just sit in their office and decide what the right thing is for them.
I don't see why it's Western, though, because so many times in Western countries, there's all of this pressure, and it just seems to me it's very individual. But the reason I asked the question about folic acid is, it seems to me that if you say that not being open to having a child with a disabling condition, so make it a thought experiment forget folic acid for spina bifida and just say, what if there was a pill you could take during pregnancy that would prevent you from having a child with, maybe it wouldn't change the number of genes, but with all of the symptoms of trisomy 21, of Down syndrome? Would you say, no, I won't take that because I'm open? Or would you say, of course, give me the damn pill?
It's not a hypothetical. Diana Bianchi is leading now studies at the NIH on treatment of trisomy 21 in utero. So a drug like the one you're envisioning is being developed right now. And once it exists, this will be the new frontier of reproductive ethics. Are we going to force women to take it because we have some ideas about how fetuses should develop, or is it going to be a choice? And I was just a part of a working group, an international working group, that started developing guidelines for in utero interventions and reproductive autonomy in that new context. So this is not a thought experiment, Bonnie. This is happening right now.
Well, I was thinking of a pill that a woman would take rather than because it seems that people think, oh, well, of course you would take your folic acid to prevent spina bifida, but you would never, in that working group that people claim to be pro-choice. Yeah, it's okay, fine to have an abortion if it's not the right time, not the right partner, etc. But to prevent having a child with a disabling condition, oh my goodness, rolling eyes. And I'm thinking, really? Well, would you take the pill to prevent it? And if you would, how can you say that it's perfectly okay to have abortion for these other reasons, but not to prevent or to choose who comes into the world?
Thank you. A very important insight. I just want to finish pushing back against your challenge, because all the research that we have done for the last 20 years shows that women are embedded in social networks and in relationships, and they think through this based, of course, on their cultural value systems and the familial and community and systemic pressures, their economic realities. So I still push against this, what I call the Western framing of, I'm an empowered woman and I am making my choices. Of course, I'm making my choices, but I'm making them under tremendous sets of forces that operate on me and frame how I even think about my choices. And I'm not sure that reproductive ethics has acknowledged that enough.
I'm going to push back on the notion of autonomy and the things you seem to imply, you think it implies. All autonomy is amidst social pressure. Welcome to the real world of autonomy. No person is autonomous without facing social pressures of all sorts. And I can think of other circumstances in which there are extreme social pressures that a person doesn't destroy a person's autonomy. So I think that when you say autonomy is not enhanced by this technology because it creates social pressures, I would want to ask, well, would we say that I shouldn't have the autonomy to resign from my professorship and take up the violin and live in virtual poverty for the rest of my life? Which would be great social pressure for me not to do. But I'm a free person to do it. And if I want to do it, I should have the right to do it.
Okay. Thank you for the question. It allows me to clarify. The paper that I showed and our analysis does not lead to the idea that NIPT per se is a bad technology from a normative perspective because it takes away autonomy. The question is usually about whole genome sequencing and giving parents information about hundreds or thousands of conditions, each one of them at a different level of risk, without appropriate support and counseling. That is a real threat. Could be resolved maybe with amazing informational resources, and maybe in high school everybody should learn about all these conditions in case they want to have children later. That's a technical issue. Right now, the way it's rolled out, it is a threat, not NIPT. As I mentioned over and over again, women want this technology, families are excited about it, governments are paying for it. It's a great technology that does enhance choice and informed choice.
Dr. Alice, question.
Thank you, Violet, for the lovely
lecture. It brings back some memory for me, not about my kids, but in the last job that I was in before I came to CHK, to the Center for Bioethics. As I told you, I was in Hospital Authority in the head office overseeing, among other issues, technology assessment. And one of the last tasks that I was doing actually before I left the public hospital service was actually to assess whether to introduce NIPT to the public hospitals in Hong Kong as a test. And I can still remember we were struggling with the idea of introducing it. There was a pressure to introduce it because it's good technology. There's not enough resources for the whole of public hospitals to do it. And we were doing this in the absence of any information of how actually culturally or societally people look at it. There were not any studies like Canada that you look at how people perceive the task. So all these discussions were not even there, regardless of whether you agree or disagree with the effect on autonomy. We were making the decision without any information on this background information. So I would just like to express my appreciation that this is really important. The engagement to understand what it means to people, stakeholders who are involved, to make decisions like this in health policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Derek?
Thank you so much for your really great talk. As a woman who studied medicine and has female empowerment drilled in my head since I was a child, I really appreciate your experience sharing. I'm really curious in terms of reproductive autonomy. There's obviously, if you decide to have a child later in life, like after your career, you have the option of NIPT. But what about the flip side of it, which is the case with many of my friends who decide, I'm going to freeze my eggs when I'm young so I can preserve the good oocytes and the good embryos as a means of reproductive autonomy. So later in life, I can choose to have those healthier eggs. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on balancing reproductive autonomy in both aspects?
So a word about elective or social egg freezing, as it is called. First of all, there's an equity issue here because it costs a lot of money. Other than Apple and Facebook, most companies don't pay for it. So it's really a technology for the rich. And that creates a gap in access, which is problematic. Okay, but now I'm talking to you as an individual. We leave the societal equity issues aside. The empirical data so far shows that a very small percentage of these eggs will be used. So young women are subjecting themselves to hormones and injections, and it's not an obvious procedure beyond the cost. There's also a medical cost. And in most cases, they will not use these eggs. Either they will end up getting pregnant naturally, or they will go through IVF and it will fail because they're now older. And it's pretty clear that clinics are not communicating this information to young women. This is a huge market. The technology is pushed aggressively. Egg freezing parties, we all heard of them. It's become a popular graduation gift from parents to young women so that they can put their babies on ice and go have their careers. It's not, empirically, we're not seeing this as very beneficial so far. Make your own decision, but know this. Know the numbers, know the risks. It's described as completely risk-free to do, and it's an insurance policy for your future reproduction. It's more dangerous to be pregnant later in life. There are other issues beyond the age of your egg. All this needs to be communicated for informed consent before the procedure. It's not happening right now. So that's at the policy level and the clinical norms. If you ask me if I were your age, would I do it? I might be tempted. It's nice to have insurance on ice, but I shouldn't think of it as insurance because there are so many barriers. Once you've done it, it doesn't mean you get to have a baby whenever you want. You have to be aware of that.
Well, thank you once again, Professor Revitsky. And this concludes the morning session of the 10th Anniversary Celebration Symposium. On behalf of CUHK Centre for Bioethics, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to all our speakers and participants for their contributions to this engaging discussion. We will now break for lunch. Our staff and students will guide you to the shuttle bus to take you to the restaurant. Please bring along your important personal belongings, and after lunch, we will reconvene at 2:00 p.m. for the Lanson Lecture in Bioethics.